You wish you had more motivation? I get it. And you're not alone. Wanting to feel more motivated or have more motivation is easily one of the biggest things that I tend to hear from clients. And oftentimes, what they fail to recognize is that motivation isn't necessarily a binary thing. Either they have it or they don't. It's a skill. And the truth is, like any skill, you can learn it and cultivate it and get better with practice. So make sure you stick around to the end of this video where I'm going to share with you the three actual parts or subsets of the skill of motivation, and I'll give you the specific tools that you can begin to utilize right away to start feeling more motivated today. To illustrate this, I'm going to pull up a little whiteboard here. But motivation is actually a catch-all term that's used to describe the subset of three separate skills: drive, goals, and grit. Now, it's essential to have all three if you're going to have any hopes of creating or sustaining long-term change, progress, or transformation over a long period of time. Okay. Now, let's look at them one by one. All right. Drive is oftentimes what most people think of when they think about motivation. Okay. It's that initial burst of energy. It's that interest. It's that curiosity, that passion. It's the reason why they start in the first place. Okay. But motivation and drive, it tends to ebb and flow, right? It comes and it goes. And the truth is that if you're waiting to feel motivated before you take action, you could be waiting a very long time. Okay. One of my mentors said something really interesting, and he asked me a question. And he said, are you interested in your goals or are you committed to your goals? And sheepishly, I didn't really know the difference. So I asked him, I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, when you're interested in your goals, you'll do it only when it's convenient. You'll do it when it's easy and you'll do it when you feel like it. But when you're committed to your goals, you'll accept no excuses, only results. And that always stuck with me. And a big part of creating motivation and sustainable change and transformation is being able to tap into our drive and create a real powerful reason why we're doing this in the first place. They say that with a strong enough why, the how becomes easy. And without a really strong why to pull us through some of those challenges, motivation tends to tank. Now, with drive, there's oftentimes a couple of different ways that you can approach it. There's an external motivation, okay? Like wanting to look better with your shirt off or, feel more confident in your wedding photos and that kind of thing, okay? Or there's also an intrinsic motivation, okay? And that's that oftentimes once you start with a specific habit, let's say exercise, for example, you start to realize how much more energy you have, how much better it makes you feel when you're done a workout, that sense of pride or that sense of accomplishment, or what it does for your mood and just overall energy in general, and that takes on a whole new power. The reason this is important is because external motivation can be really helpful, especially at the onset of a new action or a habit, while we develop some of that more intrinsic motivation. But the important takeaway here is that high performers never rely on a single source of fuel to sustain their motivation or their growth. Let's look at number two, goals. I talk to a lot of people who say things like, well, I want to be in better shape, or I want to lose a little bit of weight, or I want to earn more money and be financially free. Okay. But those are just wants. Those aren't goals. And everybody wants those kinds of things. Goals are something completely different. They're specific, they're tangible, they're targets that you can aim at, that you can break down into a step-by-step process and begin to make progress towards. Okay. Goals, I always say, are best when written down with pen and paper. Okay. And the truth is, it's pretty hard to hit a target that you can't see. And vague goals produce vague results. So the more specific you can get, the better. All right. Now, it's helpful to realize that there's actually kind of subsets or layers of goals. And we'll start at the very top with what I would call like your the vision or your mission or your value type goals. Okay. These are your like lifelong endeavors to, we'll use the example of fitness here, to be the kind of person that's able to keep up with my kids, or to have lots of energy, or to, be a type of a role model that my kids or my grandkids look up to. Okay. These are lifetime endeavors. And in the words of Simon Sinek, those are infinite gains, because you don't ever just arrive at that and then check the box and say, well, I'm done with that now, and then go on to the next thing. It's a perpetual process. Am I right? So it's helpful to have that kind of overarching general vision, mission, or values, but that's not enough. We need to support that with that next layer, and that's what are known as high hard goals. And high hard goals could be, think of as more of like medium term goals. Okay. But these are specific. It could be something like, I want to lose 20 pounds in the next 4 months, or I want to earn, an extra $10,000 in the next 6 months, or, I want to be able to run a half marathon in X amount of time. Okay. But they're specific. All right. Now, those ones oftentimes take months, if not years, to accomplish and achieve. And if we don't feel like we're making progress, if we don't feel like we're making headway towards that, sometimes the reward that we get from accomplishing those is too far out. And we don't get the immediate feedback that we need in order to sustain that motivation. And so we get discouraged and we tend to give up. That's where having clear goals can come into play. And clear goals are like the daily action items, the small little steps. I always say, set the goal, but focus on the process. This is the process, the things that should end up on your to-do list or on your calendar, as far as these are the 3 things that I need to do every single day, or here are the 5 things that I need to do this week in order to make sure that I'm making progress towards my high hard goal, that medium term goal. And if you can be consistent and persistent with those clear little goals, crossing them off, accomplishing them will give you that sense of pride and satisfaction, will be motivation in and of itself while you make headway on some of those high, hard goals. Last but not least, number 3 is grit. And grit you can think of as like the ability to stick with a challenge long after that initial motivation or drive has left. Okay. It's that persistence, that determination, that discipline. It's that stick-to-itiveness. Okay. There's a fabulous book called Grit that's written by a woman named Angela Duckworth. She did something really interesting. Angela Duckworth looked at some of the world's most successful organizations, places like Princeton, the Navy SEALs, West Point Academy. And, you could argue that everybody who goes to Princeton is probably pretty smart, likely pretty hardworking. Just in the same sense, you could argue that anybody who applies to be a Navy SEAL is probably pretty hardcore. And yet, even at that level, there are some people who succeed and others who drop off. And she wanted to know, what's the biggest difference between those that succeed and those that don't. And she boiled it down to one word: grit. Okay. And grit can be, again, an external driver or motivation. And it could be something in the form of like having a personal trainer that's expecting you to be at a certain place at a certain time. Okay. It could be an accountability partner of some sort that, helps to hold you to doing what you say that you want to do. Or it could be a coach or a mentor of some sort, but having that external accountability can be huge. And the truth is that there's actually a direct relationship between accountability and success. And that the more accountable you are to another human being, the more likely you are to succeed. And the reason is really simple, because statistically, you're 800% more likely to follow through on a task when you're accountable to another human being. This is why people who invest in coaching ultimately achieve their goals 5 times faster than people who don't. Grit can also come from an internal place as well. and learning to dig deep and find it in yourself. And this is where things like mental reframes can come into play. That's a topic for another video, by the way. Okay. But learning to like take control of that inner dialogue or that inner narrative and remind yourself and tell yourself that when things get hard, this is what separates those that succeed from everybody else. It's moments like this that are going to provide me the opportunity to learn and to grow and to improve. And in those kinds of cases, when we remind ourselves of that, it becomes an internal drive or motivation that pulls us through some of those difficult moments. Okay. But again, nobody who accomplishes long-term sustainable change, transformation, or success relies on just one of these skills of motivation. And remember, all three of these are important: drive, goals, and grit. And that's a big part of what we do in our coaching, is really start to dive in and reconnect with your why. Like I said, with a strong enough why, the how becomes easier. We also set some really clear, specific goals and then reverse engineer the process to get there. And last but not least, provide the tools, the tips, and the strategies to develop that grit. Because grit, believe it or not, is like a muscle. What happens to muscles that you don't use? They atrophy. But with practice and with spaced repetition, it gets stronger. You can develop that just like you can develop the habit and the skill of motivation. If this resonates and you'd like to learn more, I invite you to use the link below to connect for a free call. Hope to see you there.